All right, welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Fabrice Grinda. This is a really fascinating episode, I think you will find. I'm going to preview it a little bit. It's four stories. I mean, a lot of different things, but there's four big stories he tells. And each one of them I just find in and of itself fascinating. So I'm going to tell you what they are. The sound is a touch tingy in the beginning for the first couple minutes, but it resolves itself pretty quickly. You know, the first story that Fabrice tells here is about building one of Europe's first marketplaces, marketplaces like eBay, and what happens when you turn down $100 million for your business. The second story is about Zingy, what it's like to really grind out a company, what it's like to miss payroll 27 times. The third story, Fabrice built OLX. That's one of the huge global marketplaces. Those of you in the U.S. may not know it as well, but around the world, it's a multi-billion-dollar entity. It's like Craigslist for the rest of the world. In that story, he talks about how he competes violently with another player in the space and how they spend billions of dollars on television around the world. And then finally, Fabrice thinks a lot about economics and humanity and the future and the existential threats we're facing. And I think you'll find his last story, which is the story of the future, about what's happening with climate change and how technology is interacting with that, and how COVID has altered and accelerated tech companies in general. So I think you're going to find this one fascinating. Four stories for Fabrice Grinda. Welcome back. All right, welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Fabrice Grinda. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
So I guess that's a pretty specific question these days. Yeah, Fabrice has founded and sold probably more companies than most entrepreneurs have thought of. An auction site in Europe, a wireless media company in South America, OLX. People who listen all over the world will know what OLX is. Maybe not so much in the U.S., but it's a massively improved and global version of Craigslist, which was acquired by a company called Naspers. And after doing all that, he founded a VC firm called FJ Labs that's invested in over 400 companies.
So you're over 600 these days.
Over 600 companies. I can't keep up with you. This is amazing. So how did you get, what launched you down this path? What was going on for the young Fabrice Grinda that, you kind of decided to start things instead of join the big corporation?
The serendipity, I think, plays a very large role in people's lives. And when I was 10 years old, back in 1984, I got and I'd been lobbying for it, but I got my first PC. It was an 8088 compact with a 20 megabyte hard drive, which seemed infinite at the time, a 360K 525-inch floppy, and a 1200 baud modem, and a CGA monitor. And it was love at first click. Immediately loved taking it apart, rebuilding it, learning a program, playing games, connecting to built-in board services, which were the ancestor of the internet. And falling in love with computers, frankly, it really felt like a hobby. It was a means of unleashing my creativity. I was not a particularly good painter, dancer, singer, whatever, but in terms of programming, I could create the worlds I was imagining. And never occurred to me, frankly, that this would be a profession for me in the future, even though at the time I was really impressed at following the lives of Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, who were role models, but from a distance or from afar. And I guess it kind of got connected to another interest of mine, which is when I looked at what seemed to explain the world around me best, it's really economics. And when I first read both Ricardo and Adam Smith, and probably my early teens, The Wealth of Nations, of this actually seems to explain an incentive system, the way the world works, better than anything else. And so when I went to Princeton in 92, when I was 17, I actually didn't study computer science because I kind of already know how to program. I studied economics and game design and incentive systems, because to me, it was a better way of explaining the way the world worked than anything else. But again, I think liberal arts education is to teach you how to learn, and they broaden your mind, but I didn't expect any of that to be related to anything I would ever do in the future. But then kind of lo and behold, the internet was born. We had actually we got T1 lines installed in our dorms in like 93. I saw Gopher turn into Mosaic, turn into Netscape, the bubble started inflating. And then all of a sudden, I was at the right time, at the right place, with the right skills. The world finally seemed to value young people who were entrepreneurial and had technical skills. And so what had been really a hobby could finally become like I'd become a multi-billion-dollar business, and I was in a position to do something about it. Now, the issue is I graduated from Princeton in 96. I was 21. I didn't really know, even though I was top of my class, I really didn't know anything about anything. I built a computer company to pay for college, but that was not a scalable business. I'm like, okay, if I join a company, they won't take me seriously. I'm very young. If I build a company, I'm probably going to fail. So let's go to McKinsey. It's kind of like business school, except they pay you. And I did that for 2 years, and improved my oral and written communication skills, improved my public speaking, improved my ability to work in teams. Actually met another Bessemer partner called Jeremy Levine there, who ultimately then became a backer of OLX many years later. And after 2 years, I'm like, okay, I didn't actually miss the bubble, but I thought I might. Let's go and do this. Time has come. I like creating something out of nothing. I can't imagine anything other than being an entrepreneur. And so I looked for ideas I could build when I was 23. And the issue is most ideas were not, especially at that time where it was extremely expensive to build teams, to get code, there's no open source, there's no AWS, there's no code. Most ideas required skills I didn't have. If you want to build on Amazon, you needed billions of funding and supply chain skills and inventory management. If you wanted to build an E-Trade, you needed like a banking license. And then one day, kind of randomly in the summer of June 98, I came across eBay, and I'm like, wow, like this is genius. It is the very application of everything I learned theoretically in terms of game design and incentive design systems, and that I've been fascinated with as a kid from an intellectual perspective, applied here, where you can take these completely fragmented markets, where in the past, if you went to a local garage sale, chances are you wouldn't find what you're looking for, and you wouldn't be able to sell what you're trying to sell. But if you bring the liquidity and the transparency to these opaque and fragmented markets online, you can create something ginormous. And that was the second aha moment. I was like, wow. In a way, for a 23-year-old like me, this is way easier to build. Now, it has its own complexity. If you want to build a marketplace, you need liquidity, you need to match supply and demand. But it was the type of complexity it was perfectly suited for dealing with, and not the type of complexity that was not appropriate for me, like supply chains over like many countries, etc. And so I'm like, you know what? This idea seems amazing. I love the idea. They're not doing the rest of the world. Let's see if I can build an eBay for the rest of the world. And off we were to the races. And in a way, the rest is history.
And how did you do it at the time? Because you couldn't just sign up for AWS. So did you have to go convince somebody to give you money? I mean, you went to Princeton. That's great, but you're still 23. Like, how'd you animate this thing?
So, in a way, I don't know if it's luck, but I'd always been entrepreneurial. I was building computers and selling them to my classmates in high school. In college, I built a computer company exporting high-end computer equipment from the U.S. to Europe. So, kind of B2B to C. So, retailers in France would place orders for me. I would buy from wholesalers in the U.S. They would pay me up front, so it was cash flow positive from the get-go, and I would ship to them directly, and I'd pay my suppliers 30 days later. And that paid for college, and I left college, I still had $50K in the bank. And with that $50K, I did two things. One is I bought an amazing one-bedroom apartment in New York City for $115,000, which goes to show how cheap real estate was at the time. So $25K down, and the rest I borrowed, so you could also borrow reasonably easily. And then $25K, I bought 4 stocks. You might have heard of them. They were Intel, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Dell. Wow. Or Amazon and Dell. I don't even remember. I think it was Yahoo and Dell. And in 98, when I left McKinsey, I sold the stocks. I sold the apartment. I sold it for $185 like 2 years later. So that was good. And I sold the stock, made like $300K. So net of taxes, I actually had $300K. And with that $300K, it was like, okay, I can buy I can hire the core team. I can build and no one was paying themselves at that time. I mean, look,
Right.
when you're 23, your cash needs are zero.
Right.
I loved, we were in the garage of the family. It wasn't the garage. It was an abandoned pizzeria. We owned a hotel in the south of France, and there was a locale next to it that used to be a pizzeria. It had been abandoned for 20 years that no one was using, and we coded the site there. I hired one of the best programmers I knew to be CTO and co-founder with me, and we were off to the races. And then once we had the code up and running, and that's the fundamental difference with today. And it also helped that I knew how to code. I did all the CSS or the front end of the site, but I also did all the back end infrastructure. So I bought all the servers, and at that time we had to build our own data centers. So a big chunk of the money actually went to building or a data center and building servers. And of the tech team we ended up having at the end, eventually grew to 50 or 70 people. Maybe a half of it was building our own AWS, essentially, right? Maybe building our own and managing, computers would crash. We'd have to replace hard drives or replace the memory or replace the motherboard on a regular basis, as opposed to just having a team coding. So it was a very different way of managing companies. You had to do everything yourself, vertically integrated, but it was amazing.
And how did the sale come? Was this a big exit for you, or was it a?
So it was not a big exit. So I grew the company. The good news is I was competing with mostly techies who just launched an auction site, but they actually didn't think through how do you build liquidity. And I'd seen that eBay, and obviously it wasn't that hard. I read their S1. I'd actually organized themselves by category managers, and they had sales teams targeting the short tail sellers in each of the categories. And so I just duplicated their org chart. I had a head of sales, and under the head of sales, I had the category manager for coins, for stamps, for collectibles, for computer parts, for cell phones, for whatever. And we went to the short sale sellers of used inventory in the category to have listings. So the day we launched, we had more inventory than any of the competitors, and also the story was compelling. It was a time where you could be a hero in a way, the story of the French guy went to the U.S., was bringing the internet, first auctions, but ultimately the internet to France. Super young, super successful. We got a lot of PR, that led a lot of traffic. And the company pretty quickly grew to 10 million a month in sales. And we VC backed it. We raised 63 million in venture money, did really well. The problem is, and before I raised that, after the first 18 million raise, I actually had a $300 million cash offer from eBay. And I owned 40% of the company at that point. I'm like, okay, we should sell. It was obvious to me, and I think to a number of players out there, that it was a bubble. And while I think we were very valuable, I didn't think we were worth 300 million valuable. Right. And they obviously were a potential competitor, and we were in a very competitive space of what ultimately is a winner-take-all marketplace. Because if you're selling used goods, you can only sell them once. You cannot be listing them on 7 sites, because if they sell multiple sites, you can get bad reviews on the other ones where it sells. Right. And so I'm like, we should take the offer. I made a fundamental mistake where the shareholder I'd taken was not a traditional VC. Instead, he was one of the richest guys in Europe. And he saw us not as a means of making money, but as I wanted to be perceived in the press as the old industrialist of the internet. And so he actually didn't need, the fact that he was going to make 10x his money in 6 months was irrelevant to him. He's like, no, I'm not going to sell ever. And I'm like, then I realized, and I didn't know what a drag was. I didn't know any of the normal rights that people might negotiate in the shareholders agreement. I just outsourced all that to my lawyer because I was too busy running the company. And the problem is, even though my lawyer was the best lawyer in France on paper, because I was a 24-year-old kid at that point, he didn't take me seriously. And so by the time these types of offers started coming in, it was too late to do anything about it. So ultimately, sold to him and made nothing. He bought me out for 2.5 million. 2.5 years later, even though we were one of the largest sites in Europe in the category, and I gave almost all of that money to my employees because they were not going to make any money, not because of any fault of their own, but because my investor didn't want to sell or monetize. So I gave them 1.8 million. I kept 700K to go and build the next venture. And then but then by then the bubble had burst, and it was the end of the internet as we knew it. It felt like this is it. I'd missed the biggest opportunity of my life to succeed. The only time where I was at the right time, the right place, the right skills, and I'd balloon it. But I'm like, it didn't matter. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't do this because I wanted to make money. I did this because I wanted to build something out of nothing. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be a tech entrepreneur again. It doesn't matter if the internet is tiny and small and irrelevant and dead.
It is funny how many times you hear a version of that story. And I guess entrepreneurs kind of forget that, like, there's an asymmetry, especially when you're in your 20s, between kind of what the VCs are doing and what they know and what you're doing. And so the number of people I know who are like, yeah, I got nothing for this company I built. We actually had an offer along the way for $150 million, which would have changed my life, but our VC didn't care and they pushed us to go further. And it's such kind of don't call it a tragic story. I mean, no one dies from it, but it's such a painful story that you hear far more often than you would imagine.
Well, that usually happens if you've raised money at too high a price, right? Like the thing is, if your fair market price, whatever, is like 50 and you raise it 100, then when an offer comes at 150, the investors invest at 100 when you go further. If you invest at 50 and if you exit at 150, everyone's happy, and no one, and it's not going to be an issue. Right. Yeah, but also get the right. The issue here also, by the way, was not the VCs. I mean, it's very rare that VCs, if you want to sell, if you as the founder think now's the time to sell, VCs will typically trust you. The issue here is I'd not taken VC money, I'd taken strategic money, and I didn't realize that their incentives were not aligned. But at the end of the day, VCs want to make money. So when there's an opportunity for them to make money, they're going to be happy. The problem is strategics may have completely different incentive systems, and I didn't recognize that at the time. But like that's why I would tell people never take strategic money, because even if especially if that strategic is a potential buyer of your company, even though they don't have a right of first refusal, other people will assume that if they bid, they will just be counterbidded here, and if they don't, it's a massive negative signal. It's like, ooh, what do they know that I don't? And it'll decrease the exit value of your company. So I recommend founders across the board take VC money. VCs are smart. They want to make money. They're aligned with you. Do not take strategic money. Right. The only exception to that rule is if it somehow fundamentally changes your revenues and your growth trajectory, and especially if having that one allows you to get more. Like if you have 10 on board or 2 or 5 on board, it's fine, but just don't have one. Yeah. That's super dangerous.
And how did you pass through this? This is the funniest, looking back, this period around 2002, 2003, when VCs, smart people, were saying things like, well, that's over. Everything that could have been invented on the internet's been invented, and it didn't work. It's such an astonishing.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, it was really a bubble in '99 or 2000. I mean, people would today are like, is the world we're in a bubble? And like the answer is resounding no. Outside of the SPAC world, SPACs are definitely a bubble right now. Yes. But outside of the SPAC world, it's not a bubble. Frothy, perhaps, and also perhaps with good reason. I mean, a combination of low interest rates and the fact that online and e-commerce is massively benefiting from the tragedy that the world is suffering right now. But in '99, it was a bubble. Let me give you a sense of things, of what a bubble looks like. A bubble looks like when we were getting committed binding term sheets signed by people offering to invest millions of dollars in the company. These by fax. These are people I never even met. Okay, so when someone is giving you a term sheet for like $20 million that you haven't even talked to, that's a bubble. When companies are worth tens of billions where they don't even have a dollar in revenues, that's a bubble. And that's definitely not the case today. Many of the tech companies are like the most profitable companies you can find online and the fastest growing. Now, 2001, exact opposite. Nuclear winter. What March this year was like is nothing relative to like 2001. I don't. Every major direct-to-consumer B2C company had gone under. Webvan, Pets.com, eToys, every major telecom company had gone under. MCI, WorldCom. And the very same VCs that were throwing money at me in 99, 2000, or 98 wouldn't even return my call. Or if I got in a call with them and I told them I was doing B2C telecom, like, and not even finish the sentence, then hung up. And so that led to a very different mindset. I'm like, okay, maybe the internet is dead. Maybe it's not going to be big. Money is no longer available. And so I went through a not soul searching. Like, clearly I love the marketplaces. I want to be building marketplaces, but getting marketplaces to scale and building liquidity, especially in a world without, SCM, without Facebook, et cetera, is actually expensive and difficult. I mean, the main driver of liquidity at that time was TV advertising. And the only very successful one, right? Their SEO didn't really exist yet. Nothing really existed. And I'm like, okay, I need to build something that's going to be super capital efficient and profitable rather quickly. And so I actually picked an idea that I didn't like. I didn't like the product I was building. I didn't like the consumers I was catering to. I didn't like the products I was selling. I didn't think they were a value add to humanity. I didn't like the people I was working with. I didn't like but I'm like, I can build a business out of that. And at the end of the day, what matters to me is being an entrepreneur. I want to be an entrepreneur, and I don't want to go bankrupt if possible. And so I'll pick a business that I think I can make successful in the circumstances, even though I didn't really like the product. And I loved being an entrepreneur enough that I was willing to build things I didn't particularly care for. And so I built a ringtone company in 2001. And, ringtones, yes, okay, they're fun, they're cute, they provide maybe social value to teenagers, but they're not a meaningful contributor to humanity's welfare. And so it wasn't like something I'm like, wow, like I am making a fundamental difference in people's lives. But I'm like, this category has proven to be very large and very profitable in other countries. I think I can build it really cheaply, and no one in the US thought that this was interesting and compelling. Now, this is a time period where you cannot send a text message between different carriers, and even within a carrier to send a text message, you needed to buy a $5 a month subscription, and the other person needed to have it too for you to be able to send text messaging. Needless to say, there's no text messaging, there's no payment systems, etc. But none of the players who could have done this, and there were like big VC-backed players like UPOC that raised $18 million, perfect position to do this. They told me, no, this is not interesting to us. We want to do community messaging. And so I'm like, okay, no competition, no one believes in this. I think I can do this. And so I came back in the US in 2001, and for basically 2 years, invested every last penny I had, 100% of the $700K.
Wow.
And I didn't put it all at once. It's just every month I would need to pay payroll. Right. And eventually, then I borrowed 100,000 of my credit cards. And then I ran out of money. And at that point, we had not yet, even though I'd started signing contracts with the music companies, it took 2.5 years to get it took a year and a half to get the first real contract on the licensing side. It took 2.5 years to get the first carrier contract. And the music companies didn't think this could be a big business, even though ultimately ended up being most of the revenues. But they didn't want to give me deals. And so I actually started by violating all of their copyrights, but I was keeping track of everything I was violating. And often I was even sending them checks. And so a year later, when they started realizing that I was violating all their copyright, I started getting these cease and desist, and it's like $250,000 copyright infringement fee per download. So I was being sued for billions of dollars. And so they would call me, I'd pick up the phone, I'd talk to the lawyer, like, oh, I'm so excited to be finally talking to you. I've been trying to reach you forever. And so they're like sending me a $2 billion lawsuit. And I'm like so happy and excited to talk to them. And because what I realized is I never had put any money in the company. That's why I was drip feeding the cash any month. It would cost them more money to sue me, to close me down, than to settle with me. And so I would offer, okay, I'll pay. Abe, first of all, many of you have deposited the checks I sent you. So I would argue we have an implicit contract. And B, for those who haven't, why don't I give you 10, 20K and we get this done and we get a license? So we started getting licensed with everyone. We're the only ones licensed. And then the big phone companies like Verizon or Sprint Nextel or Singular or AT&T at the time, they didn't want to do deals with little startups. But I just kept being there, being at every conference, calling them, etc. And after 2.5 years, one of them said, okay, let's try a deal of like 25 ringtones. And that was Sprint. Massive success. They used it in a marketing campaign. And then because they're lemmings, all of them wanted them, immediately wanted them. So we went from no carriers to all carriers in like a 6-month period.
Wow.
But for the first 2 years, I missed payroll 27 times. So after I ran out of my $700K and the $100K borrowed in credit card debt, I was raising money, but no one would invest. So I would end up, every person I would meet, I'd say, look, I have this amazing company. I just need 5K or 10K. And I raised 1.4 million in 5K increments, basically.
Wow.
And so I would miss payroll. And I would tell the employees, I don't understand. The bank screwed up again. I don't know why they didn't send the wire this month. But of course, I had no money, so that's why they didn't send the wire. And then I'd find some guy to give me 10K or 5K, and I'd make payroll. And every 2 weeks, I'd be like in that process. And so I missed it 27 times. including at the very end, 4.5 months in a row. I mean, I was living in New York, sleeping on the couch in the office. I think I was spending $2 a day. I mean, I had a shower at the office, toilet at the office. I couldn't even afford food. I was eating ramen noodles. I couldn't even afford coffee. So I think I lost like 40 pounds.
Right.
But in so doing, set the stage for success. So then I finally missed payroll for the, well, not for the last time. I really ran out of money on April 1st of 2003, but that's also when the contract went live at Sprint. The problem is these guys pay you quarterly plus 45. So that check was coming August 15 of 2003. And until then, I stopped paying people for 4.5 months. And, something funny happens when you stop paying people. They stop showing up for work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we went from 27 people to 7 people. I started coding again, which I had done in a while. And by the way, we signed all the carriers. And finally, the checks that came in that saved us in August 15 or 16, 2003, and we were profitable. Now, the funny thing is, I told my team we're safe, we're profitable, et cetera, but employee 2 and 3 left. They were older, they had families. And even though this time I meant it, we are safe, this will never happen again. The problem is, once you've told people one too many times, okay, this time, now we're good, they didn't believe me anymore.
Right.
And so they left. And sadly for them, I mean, they left millions of options on the table. So then the company became a rocket ship. So we went from $1 million in revenues in 02, 5 million in 03, but 4 million of that in Q4, 50 in 04, 200 in 05. And we built this company the old-fashioned way on profits. So we became profitable, and then we never became. Once we became profitable, I made sure we never lost money ever again.
Right.
And sold it. And almost sold it for very cheap. Almost sold it for $8 million. Kind of in that summer of 2003, we finally had a buyout offer. I own 53.7% of the company, and I'm like, wow, $4 million. It changes my life.
Right.
I'm tired. This is not working. I'm like, I don't love the category. Let's sell. But then the company started doing better, and someone else came in and offered 10. Someone came in and offered 12, then 15, then 18, then 20. I'm like, you know what? I'm not selling. But then in Q1 of 2004. We did 4 million in revenues, 1 million in profits, and a Japanese company said 40 million. I'm like, okay, that's real money.
Yeah.
And I thought through, how big do I think this gets? And I kind of made a mistake in a way. I underestimated I think this would get and how quickly. I'm like, we did 4 million in revenues in Q1. Maybe we'll do 20 in 2004 and 50 in 2005. So I hired a bank, which, by the way, if you ever sell a company, hire an investment bank. They can play the bad cop role. You're the good cop. Or you can, and the next company, Bessemer, actually played that role. So Bessemer was the bank in a way. And of course, even though it's you driving the negotiation, I would always play like, I really want to work with you, but my bankers are telling me what you're offering is not market, and therefore you need to do a little bit more effort to get me there. Of course, it was me driving it, but it doesn't appear as though it's you, and so you can still build a good rapport with the person buying you. And ultimately, the bank doubled the price. So we ran an auction, ran a process, and I sold it for 80 million in cash in June of 04. And so I was 29. That made, I guess, pre-tax $43 million, post-tax 26.5. And but the funny thing is, that was not the most meaningful moment in my life. The most meaningful moment in my life was the day we became profitable. So that August 16, 2003, we were saved. And at that point, we were so busy growing like crazy that actually I still lived in that same studio apartment after that I'd gotten for like another 4 years. I think I bought an Xbox, a TV, and a tennis racket. That was my big extravaganza. Wow. And then I was too busy because we were growing. I mean, we went from 7 people back to 27 to 45 to 50 to 100, 150 to 200. It was a rocket ship.
That's just an incredible entrepreneurial story.
Yeah, it was fun.
But so now, I mean, you're wealthy, and you're 29 years old. You love being an entrepreneur, but how does your mindset change at this point? I mean, now you could just ski and get the tennis racket out every day, and you don't need to start another company, right?
Yeah, but I never built this to make money, right? I built this because I like building something and investing, and it comes down to what drives you. And as a student of history, if you look at the history of humanity, and we'll take a little step back on underlying motivations, the vast majority of the history of humanity is one of struggle and survival. Essentially, GDP per capita, life expectancy, and every major metric did not change for humans from 10,000 BC to 1800 AD. I mean, from if you want 100,000 BC to 10,000 to 1800 AD, and in 1800 AD, life expectancy around the world was on average 29. The highest life expectancy in the world was like 39. It was like in Amsterdam, but it was 39. It was ridiculously low. 96% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. People were working 80 hours a week, barely making ends meet, surviving. And yet, in the next 200 years, the lives of everyone in humanity has been extraordinarily transformed. I mean, extreme poverty went down by 99%. The life expectancy in the richest countries now is actually over 80. Global life expectancy is like in the 70s. We work 40 hours a week to have a quality of life that it was unimaginable to the kings and emperors of yesteryear. And the reason for that is because of the extraordinary productivity growth. And that productivity growth came from the application of technology by entrepreneurs. So actually, all of it essentially is driven by entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs and their application of technology is inherently deflationary. It makes things cheaper. And because it makes things cheaper and it makes humans more productive, it makes them richer by making them more productive, and it makes them richer by making things cheaper for them. So it used to be that if you go back to 1900, the rich went on vacation, the poor didn't go on vacation. The rich had running water, electricity, or a car, or a horse carriage, the poor didn't. And on a equality of outcomes, there's been massive convergence. That's not to say that all is for the best in all the possible world. This is not a Pengalosian view. We still have fundamental issues of social injustice, inequality of opportunity, climate change is an existential threat. But technology actually gives us the means to address all the societal ills. And so as I see it, the meaning of my life is to harness the improved user experiences, the deflationary power of technology, and its ability to make fundamental changes to our ecosystems to address the two societal ills that we're facing today, are the two existential threats, which are climate change and probably the rise of populism driven by the social injustice and inequality of opportunity. And so as I'm 29, I'm like, I'm in a position to do this. And I think that technology, entrepreneurship, venture capital is the way to address these problems. That politics has failed us, will continue to fail us. It is structurally incapable of addressing these issues for a variety of reasons, and will continue to be structurally enabled. So regardless of who gets elected, I think they have ultimately very little impact, because by design, the system prevents change. And it's kind of descended into these like factions that are preventing each other from doing anything, getting anything done. And so perhaps, when you were in the 1940s, being Keynes was amazing. You can participate in creating the Bretton Woods system or the IMF, and policymakers had real impact on the world. I think today they can have very negative impact, but their ability for positive impact is more limited. And if you look at imagine the life of a poor farmer in India today. I mean, he has a smartphone in his pocket, and with that smartphone, he has access to the sum of humanity's knowledge. He has global free video communications. He has more access to information and communications than the president of the United States did 20 years ago. That's mind-boggling, right? And we kind of take it for granted. And so I see an opportunity to do this across the board, to create better outcomes in everything, healthcare, education, to create systems that are not biased. So you have better outcomes in every category. And so I think we're at the very beginning. And I really felt that as well in 2005. So I'm like, you know what? I built this company. I was part of a publicly traded company. I have a $200 million company. I mean, revenue-wise, profitable, et cetera, but I don't like the category. Why don't I go back to my first love? And the beauty of now having capital means I don't need to deal with the love money and the pre-seed round and the seed round. I can put the first few million myself. I can put and avoid that dilution, start with a larger scale, and get going. But now, by the way, I've also identified people I love to work with. I can keep working with them. And so it was obvious to me that I had to go back to being a founder and going back to marketplaces, which was my near and dear to my heart.
And this is OLX, right?
And that is OLX.
Which is, as I understand it, you looked at Craigslist and said, this is, first of all, not global, and there's 20 things that could be better about this.
Yeah, so Craigslist, I have kind of this love-hate relationship because they had started building liquidity in the early 2000s, and in a way, they're providing an amazing public service to humanity. They're free. They're allowing you to make money by selling goods if you need to find a job, to find an apartment, to find a roommate. I thought they were doing a terrible job. They were not moderating the content, and as a result, like all the first results were like spam, scam, murders, prostitution. Also, by having like personals on the site, they were anti-female friendly, and you need to think through who are the primary decision makers in life and around the world, including the U.S. It's women,
Right.
and often actually it's housewives that are the primary decision makers in terms of where do you live, which car do you buy, which couch you buy, which babysitter you hire. In the emerging market, it was housewives and it's working women and women in general in the West. And they had created essentially the least safe female-friendly environment possible. And so I actually went to Craig and Jim, and I'm like, look, I'd like to either run it for you for free or buy it from you. And they said no. And really, I saw it as a service to humanity. I'm like, look, what you're doing is great, but it could be greater. Let me help you. And I'm like, maybe I don't have the credibility to do this because I'm at that point I'm 29, but like I built a ringtone company. Yeah. Do they think I can do this? But they didn't take me seriously. Showed up on drugs in the meeting, like fading in and out of consciousness, really not even caring. In fact, they told me, I think, well, if someone builds something better, great, so be it. Like they didn't care. And I was like, who do I want to compete with? Do I want to compete with the traditional, super smart, MBA, hungry, or whatever? Do I want to compete with these guys who don't seem to care? And so I'm like, I can do a better job. So I got the team back together. I hired I was building my auction site. I'd done a deal to help build an eBay of Latin America called Deremate, which ultimately merged with Mercado Libre, which is now the leading auction site in Latin America. And that team had just merged with Mercado Libre, so they were available. And I taught them on my code for Auckland, my European site. And so, and auctions and classifieds are related. In a way, classifieds are simpler, but they're both simpler and more complex, but simpler from a programming perspective. You don't need to be running auctions, etc. And decided it was time to build the site. Now, the objective was not to go global. I mean, it wasn't necessarily to win in the emerging markets. Ideally, I would have liked to win in the U.S., but it just turned out that with the capital we had, building the network, breaking the network effects that Craigslist had built was not possible, and the cost of acquisition of customers in the U.S. and in the West was too high relative to the capital we raised. And look, we'd raise a lot of money. We'd raise on a PowerPoint essentially 10 out of 28 million valuation at launch, because all the people that I then wanted to back me at the end of Zingy, by the time I didn't need the money anymore, were dying to fund my next company. Right, and it helps to be a serial entrepreneur that's successful, because then you build a reputation. People are willing to pay. They will pay up to. They'll essentially pay up to a Series A at launch because they think they know you're going to make it. They don't worry that you're going to fail to execute. But with that amount of money, what we did is we spent $50K in 100 countries. That's $5 million. And it just turned out that it really, sadly, it didn't work in the West and it didn't work in the US, but it really, really worked in India, in Pakistan, in Portugal, and in Brazil. Of these four, two obviously are more valuable than the rest. So we're like, okay, let's focus on Brazil and India, but let's keep harnessing the ones that are working well. So we went from 100 countries to 4, became huge there, and started verticalizing, becoming very profitable in these countries, and then use that to then re-expand ultimately to where it is today, which is 5,000 employees in 30 countries, and it's 350 million uniques a month. And the company is probably over $1 billion in revenues right now. Wow. And in the top countries, it's probably a 75% EBITDA margin. Like in Russia, I think it's like 200 revenues, 150 in EBITDA. It's probably even more than that.
Wow, it's incredible. And it was acquired, right? Was it Naspers that acquired OLX?
Naspers acquired it. Naspers is a South African media company, and their claim to fame in a way was pivoting multiple times from being a traditional media company or newspaper company to a cable TV company to then buying 33% of Tencent back in 99 or 2000 for like 30 or maybe $50 million. Yeah. And that stake today is worth over 200 billion.
Yep.
And I didn't want to sell it. I mean, I loved OLX. I thought it was the company I was meant to build and run the rest of my life. We had millions of people. We were part of the fabric of society in so many countries, in Africa, in Southeast Asia. Every day we'd be getting thousands of letters from users telling us how we have changed their lives. The woman told us, oh, I fell in love with my husband all over again because I was able to find a babysitter, or I found my dream job, or I was able to sell my couch and make rent and not go bankrupt, and then things turn around. And every day, and of course, it sounds like it's amazing, but actually, thousands of letters per day when you have like 20 million uniques a day is actually not that much. But in life, when every morning you get a summary of like the best letters we get from people saying how meaningful we are to their lives, you feel better about yourself, I can tell you. And the thing is, we had a publicly traded competitor in Europe called Schibsted that had decided to attack us in our core markets. And they spent hundreds of millions on TV. And we had not spent any money on TV at that point in time, in Brazil and in Portugal, which were two of our core markets. And Brazil accounted for literally 400% of our profits. So we're taking the profits from Brazil, we're spending in the rest of the world. And so all of a sudden I went to American VCs in 2010. I'm like, look, so last year we did 20 million revenues, I don't know, profitable. I bad news, this year we're going to do zero in revenues and lose 50 or 100. And in fact, they've spent 300 million in Brazil and like 50 million in Portugal. We need to raise like 50 or 100 and go spend it all on TV in like Zimbabwe and Pakistan. And in 2010, when I talked to later stage VCs in the US, that didn't resonate. I think had that happened in 2015 or 2016, maybe a SoftBank or a Tiger might have been up for it. Right. But the later stage VCs were not willing to fight that battle, and I thought we were going to lose. And I mean, we were still ahead on market share, but we had to stop monetizing. We had to fight back. And Naspers came in and said, "Look, we'll fund you. We'll fund you. We'll give you." It ultimately gave me almost $1 billion in war chests, and we won. We won the war. We ended up merging 51% for us, 49% for them in Brazil and a bunch of other countries, and making global peace. But that global peace came after hundreds of millions have been spent on TV. In Brazil alone, they spent 300, we spent 200. We won, but like it's 200 million. It's real money. Right. We really enriched the media companies. But ultimately, I've built a company that today is probably doing, I don't know the numbers, it's publicly traded. The numbers are public because Schibsted is now called Advinta, is publicly traded. And so, I don't know, so 100 million revenues, 50 EBITDA, or maybe 150, 75, something like that. And maybe even more these days. Well, the real has decreased, so who knows. But it was worth it, but it was an expensive battle that no American VC wanted to fight. And so I sold reluctantly, but it was actually the right choice for the company.
Right. Well, and as you exited that and then started FJ Labs to become a VC, you're probably thinking at this point, that's the last company you're probably just going to personally build. I mean, I guess you weren't sleeping on the couch. Like, how does that make you sad, or are you like, no, this is even more exciting being a VC and helping other people?
So first of all, I'm not sure. First of all, that ended up not being true. But I don't think that's the way I was thinking about it. So I started becoming an angel investor from the very minute I became an entrepreneur. By virtue of being a consumer-facing internet CEO who was successful and visible, a lot of entrepreneurs started asking for money and advice from the beginning. So I started angel investing in '98. And so now, I was so busy when I was running OLX that I said, okay, I need to create a set of heuristics to evaluate companies really quickly. So I came up with this mental framework for evaluating startups in 1 hour, deciding if I invest or not. And I said, because I don't have time and I don't have time to learn about new categories, I'm only going to do marketplaces. And even as I was an entrepreneur, at the very beginning, I was like, should I be angel investing? Like, is this a distraction from my core job as a founder? And I realized that actually it was very helpful. If I could articulate something to someone, regardless of whether it was a customer acquisition strategy, how to scale a team, how to scale the technology, et cetera, it meant I understood it. And actually seeing the trends by talking to all these other amazing founders, what they were doing, et cetera, kept my pulse on the fingers of the market, my fingers on the pulse of the market. And it was extremely useful for me as a founder. And so I'm like, it cannot take too much time. which is why I created this mechanism for deciding very quickly whether to invest. But I thought it was useful. And so by 2013, I'd already made, when I left OLX, I'd already made over 100 angel investments. Wow. And I'd been good at it, meaning I had over 20 exits. My realized IR was over 60 or 70%. And I'm like, I like building companies and I like investing in companies. So let's create a structure that allows me to do both. So FJ Labs is actually not a traditional venture fund. It's a hybrid. It's a venture fund on the one hand, where we invest in over 100 startups, mostly marketplaces, mostly in the US every year. But it's also a startup studio where every year we start 2 companies de novo. And in the studio, frankly, I probably spend more time in the studio side than I do in the venture side. It actually allows me to get my 0 to 1 startup creation itch out of the way, because you need to come up with the idea, come up with the team, do unit testing, build the product. And the first few times, literally, I essentially became VP product CTO for the first year, for the first 2 companies we built that way. Hired the tech team, built the product, wrote the stories, became Scrum Master. And actually something funny happened along the way. And frankly, FG Labs itself was not really formalized until we had external capital, which only happened in 2016. I actually became CEO again. In 2014, one of the companies we were starting, I'm like, who's better to build a classified site in the US than me to go and compete with Craigslist? So I created this little company called Sell It, which then I merged with Wallapop. I became chairman of Wallapop, which is a big mobile classified site in Spain, which is still ginormous to this day, for like 10 billion in GMV, and became CEO of the US. But then that became competitive. OfferUp and LetGo launched. And LetGo, of course, was owned by my old company, OLX. And I'm like, okay, that's stupid. We're fighting with the same playbook with tens of millions of TV money. And so I merged Wallapop with LetGo and LetGo. So I was CEO actually 2014 and 2016 again, and put FJ Labs in a way. I'm still doing the investment committee meetings right on the side. And I don't exclude doing it again, actually. I love building companies. I love running companies. I actually tried to buy eBay Classifieds in 2015 and to run it. And I knew John Donahue was CEO at the time, and we made an offer while they were divesting PayPal. And I thought they were going to take it, but they changed their mind. And then more recently, I was involved in one of the 3 bids that was competing to buy eBay Classifieds in 2020. Not sure ultimately I would have liked running it when I realized that it's not like OLX. OLX is a company built by me, for me, and with one tech platform and one tech team. This was really more of a traditional private equity play with like 27 different tech platforms, different P&Ls. It probably would have been a nightmare and I would have hated it, but I knew what to do with it at least. So perhaps chairman instead of CEO. But that fell through. But I'm actually not against the idea of being a founder again. The issue is, once you've reached a certain level of success, you only want to do things that are big and move the needle for humanity and for yourself. And the thing is, most of the largest ideas, you don't know that upfront. I knew that for OLX. It was obvious to me OLX could be a $100 billion company. The thing is, imagine Airbnb at the very beginning. Like inflatable air mattresses in people's living rooms. That doesn't sound like a big idea. Right. Think of Uber at the beginning. Oh, black cars for rich people. Doesn't sound like a big idea. Right. It became a big idea over time. And the thing is, if I'm not willing to take the chance to go into something that will be smaller, which I don't think I am because the opportunity cost is high, because I love the rest of what I do at FJ Labs, maybe I'll never be a founder again. But I don't actually exclude it. And I'm sure I would find a way to make it work with FJ Labs.
What are the things you look at do you still use the framework that you came up with all those years ago when you're looking at a company today?
Absolutely. I mean, FJ Labs is really an extension of what I did as an angel, just formalized with more capital and external investors and a team to help me. But it's still the same thing. Whenever we evaluate a company, and we evaluate it, I mean, essentially these days it's 2 1-hour calls. The team will take the first call, evaluate the 4 things we describe, write a summary, make a presentation of the investment committee meeting on Tuesday, and then my partner and I will take a second call. That's the recommendation, and that second call will make the decision of free investment. So in 2 1-hour calls in 1 week maximum, you'll get a decision. And by the way, if I'm on the first call, you might on the call I will tell you we're in for this amount or not. But basically, the framework is as follows: 1, do we like the team? and I'll explain later what I mean by that. 2, do we like the business? 3, do we like the deal terms? And 4, does it fit with our thesis of where the world is going? Now, and all 4 kind of have to be true collectively. One and on their own is not enough. So the team alone is not enough for us. And I'll explain why also in a second for that. Now, every VC in the world will tell you, I invest in extraordinary talent or extraordinary teams. The thing is, that's a very soft metric. What is an amazing team? And it can't be, I know it when I see it. So for us, it's really 2 fundamental talents. One is storytelling skills. And our observation is people that are amazing storytellers have a huge comparative advantage in raising capital, attracting better teams, doing better BD deals, getting more PR. The thing is, that's not enough. If you're only a wonderful storyteller, maybe you built Theranos, or maybe you built Fab.com,
Right.
you get hundreds of millions of revenues, but you can never make money. So the second skill we want, and we want that skill in the same founder, the CEO founder, is someone who's numbers driven, analytical, thoughtful, knows the business they're in. And the thing is, that on its own is not enough, because you may build a profitable small business, but if you don't have the storytelling skills, you're not going to be able to scale. And so we want, in the Venn diagram intersection, these 2 is rather small. But if you have those, that's amazing. And of course, in the process of talking through that, we're going to evaluate you on grit, tenacity, and passion. But frankly, it's really around the evaluation of your storytelling skills and your analytical skills. Number 2, do we like the business? Now, there are a number of things you can look for. Can this be a $1 billion company? Can they be the market leader? Which has a lot of ancillary, or the underlying dynamics of the market interesting? Is it fragmented supply and demand? Ultimately, I think it can all be boiled down to essentially one metric on unit economics. Are the unit economics of the business good? And for me, good unit economics is one where you recoup your fully loaded customer acquisition costs on a net contribution margin basis over the first 6 months, where you 3x your CAC over the first 18 months. And who knows, most of the companies we talk to haven't been live for 18 months. Who knows afterwards where the LTV to CAC is, but ideally there's negative churn and maybe it's 10 to 1, 20 to 1. Now, if you're not live, I want you to have thought through what it is. Oh, the average order value in the industry is this, and we expect to be in the average order value. The margin structure in the industry looks like this, and ours looks like this as well. And by the way, I expect you to be in line with the industry. You can't. I'm not going to buy that you're going to have 5 times the AOV or 5 times the recurrence. And even though you may not be live, I expect you to have done customer acquisition cost testing, landing page analysis, density analysis on the keywords to make sure you can spend a lot of money, potential conversion rate analysis to evaluate your CAC. And yes, it's an estimate, but you need to be able to talk through it intelligently. And if your unit economics are not there, you need to tell me why, with scale, they're going to get there on their own. And on their own, meaning I don't need every star in the universe to align for you to get there. It's just with scale you get there. So if you're a food delivery company and right now you have $50K a month in GMV and you're doing 1 delivery per hour for your guy who has a $15 an hour cost, and your unit economics are underwater. But if you do $150K a month and all of a sudden your guy's doing 3 deliveries an hour and your delivery costs $5 a delivery and it works, I can believe that. It can't. It doesn't need to be something completely too stretched. Number 3, are the deal terms fair in light of the opportunity, the quality of the team, and the traction that you have? And even though there's massive variance, of course, if you're a second-time founder or third-time founder, you've been very successful, you can command higher prices. If you have insane growth rates, you can command higher prices. There's still pretty clear expectations of what you're raising and how much with what traction at each round. So at the traditional marketplace, it takes 10 to 20%. It would look something like that. At pre-seed round, so the angel round, you're raising 1 at 3 to 5 free, and you're at launch. With that, you get to your seed round in 12 to 18 months, and it cannot be 3 years later. It really has to be in that time frame. You get a $150K a month in GMV, with a 20% take rate. That's $30K net revenue. So if you want to think about it, maybe net revenues is more appropriate. So you're at like 10 to 50K net revenues. You're raising 3 at 6 to 12 free, but the average is probably 3 at 9 pre-12 posts. With that, I expect you to be at $650K a month in GMV. Again, if you're a 10-20% marketplace take rate marketplace, if you're a B2B marketplace with like a 1% take rate, it needs to be a lot higher, because I expect your net revenues to be 100 to 200K or something like that. And then you're raising 7 at 18 pre, 25 post, like whatever, 5 to 10 at 15 to 30 pre. So pretty big ranges. And with that, you get a 2.5 million in GMV a month. That's like 500K net revenues per month, let's say. And you're raising 20 at like 50 to 80 pre. Again, massive ranges. These are not normal Gaussian distribution curves. They're fatter than that because the great founders, great growth can command higher prices. Their A might look like a B. But if you come to me and you're like, I need 50 million to get going, not going to happen, right? I don't believe it. If the price is too high, I'm not going to do it. And I guess fourth, last but not least, is your idea in line with where my thesis of where the world is going is? So right now, when it comes to marketplaces, I have 3 theses, and I overlay on these theses a perspective on the future of work, the future of food, the future of real estate, the future of lending, and a few others.
Right. Well, why don't I finish up with this? As you kind of look across the landscape of entrepreneurship and what you're seeing and kind of what's happened, COVID sort of changing the world, are you optimistic? Are you not optimistic? Like how are you feeling about the future right now?
Let me answer this in multiple ways. So first of all, while COVID is a profound stressor and frankly is a creator of distress for many people in people's lives, it's actually been extraordinary for most startups. If I look at our portfolio, 90% of our portfolio companies are doing much better because of COVID. Because what happens is crisis in general, or accelerators of underlying trends. So actually, if you look back, and again, I'll put my economic historian hat on for a second. If you look back at the Great Depression, it was actually the greatest period of productivity growth and increase in the U.S. ever that I'd seen in that century, because it was necessary. And so, in a way, necessity is the mother of invention. If you look at the most defining companies of the last decade, they were all created in the 2008-09 financial crisis. Uber, Airbnb, Slack, WhatsApp. That's not a coincidence. So I actually suspect that some of the most interesting companies to have an impact in the next decade will have been created in like this. Frankly, maybe even coming of Asian COVID. So it might have been created in 2018, 2019, or will have been created in this time period, 2020, 2021. And the reason we're seeing massive acceleration in most of our portfolio companies because a lot of things that were happening slowly are now happening quickly. So online education had barely started coming online. Now it's like become the norm. Online telehealth. We're even seeing acceleration in online public services, where in Europe before, there's no way you have to go to public notary or get an apostille to get things certified. Now you can just do it online. You can start paying. A lot of the public services have moved online in a way that's completely unprecedented. E-commerce is accelerated, or food delivery companies are absolutely crushing it. Many of them have like 10x from last year or 5x. And these are companies, I mean, look at Instacart. Instacart last year was doing $5 billion in sales. When you're at $5 billion in sales a year, you don't typically, maybe you grow 50%. They 4x'd in 1 year. Right. I mean, that's insane. At that scale, that you get 4x. So most of our portfolio companies have seen massive fundamental acceleration. Now, a few of them, 10%, are completely dead because they were in the categories affected by COVID. Tourism, travel, offline events, right? If you're in the StubHub type or Live Nation type business, I think their bookings are down 96% in Q2. Offline conferences. I mean, if you're in these businesses through no fault of your own, you're kind of screwed. But for the most part, people have been benefiting. Now, the reason I'm optimistic in general about humanity, so let's ignore startups for a second, in the future of humanity, is we have the means at our disposal to actually address all the fundamental issues that we're facing. And I think as tech founders and VCs, and we have an obligation to actually make the world a better place. And we have the means at our disposal. So I'll address it as briefly as I can, both elements. So climate change. Fundamental issue is greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 77%, methane 23%, everything else kind of irrelevant. In the greenhouse gas emissions, we have 5 culprits: 25% electricity production, 25% farming, 20% manufacturing, 16% transportation. So these 4 categories, let's say. Electricity production, solar has decreased in cost by 99% over the last 40 years. It's divided by 5 in the last decade. It's actually already cheaper to produce solar energy than any other form, and it continues to be cheaper by the day. Now, the issue today is storage, but even there, we're seeing massive improvements. So first of all, on energy production, we're at 1.6 kilowatt per hour in solar. We're at like 5-6 cents in gas and coal and like 8 cents in nuclear. So it's already the cheapest way. Over half the capacity, new capacity added in the U.S. is renewable. Most of that is solar. It'll continue to be the case even with us out of the Paris Accords. Battery costs have divided by 85% in the last 9 years, continue to improve, and we're seeing massive in the lab improvements in like speed of recharging the batteries. And there's like things like energy vault that are suggesting we could use gravity to store electricity at scale. So I think we'll solve that. Food production, we have companies that are working on changing the feed to decrease greenhouse gas emissions, like Utrol. You have synthetic biology that is going to allow us to have like extraordinary meat that is lab grown. So I don't think that going plant-based is probably the solution. So I don't think it's impossible foods because it's highly processed. So that'll address the next 25%. That's about a decade away. On the transportation side, we're seeing obviously Tesla leading electrification, but we're even seeing in like aircraft, where we already are seeing short-range aircraft and VTOL aircraft. So I'm super optimistic we're going to address the greenhouse gas emission issues, and we have companies working on carbon removal. And then on the equality of opportunity, we have a number of societal ills that are driven by the underlying structure of how things are funded, right? Like, so public schools in the US suck because they're funded by local property taxes. And so bad neighborhood, bad school, good neighborhood, good school. But like now we have these online, and a lot of colleges also in the middle are not providing good value for the money. That's being completely disrupted for the better by better solutions and more scalable solutions online with online education, with a combination of MOOCs and other. We're seeing the same thing in telemedicine, where again, you're a bad neighborhood, bad hospitals. You have people commuting hours a day, right? So the major cities have been badly designed. They have zoning laws and landscape that are such that you can't build. And because you can't build, you have increased prices. And like San Francisco, 80% of the city is zoned that you can't have apartment buildings. And as a result, it's too expensive to live in San Francisco. It's not a problem of the startups. It's actually a problem of the legislation that's preventing the building. But as people are now working remotely and building these tools, it's actually changing the quality of life for people that had to be commuting 3 hours a day to make a living. So I'm profoundly optimistic that we're going to be in a position to address all of our side deals. That's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take 10, 20 years, but that's what we're here for.
I love it. Well, on that wildly optimistic note, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. This was fun.
All right. This is Something About Your Podcast. Fabrice Grinda is my guest. Talk to you next time.